Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll take a look at the Prohibition exhibit at the Clay County Museum in Moorhead. But first, joining me now is author Sherry Register. Sherry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
As you join us today, of course, you're here to talk about your book, a new book, The Big Marsh. But before we get started on the book, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background and maybe where you're originally from.
Well, I'm originally from Albert Lea, Minnesota, southern Minnesota, which is where the book is set, actually. And I live in Minneapolis now. I once upon a time was an academic, but I've always, my whole life, intended to write, and I'm glad to say that that's become my major profession.
Oh, wow. What got you into writing? How did what got you interested, and when did you start?
I think it goes way back to when I was about 3 years old, and my sisters were pestering me to say the alphabet all the time, and one day I said it backwards, and they decided that I was destined for letters and words, and that's really been my life, as I've been writing forever.
Yeah. Well, Sherry, why did you write this book, and what is it about?
Well, the first impulse for writing it came from a newspaper article from the 1930s that I discovered when I was working on a previous book, which is called Packing House Daughter. And I ran across this article that was headlined, "Connivings of Dishonest Men Cheat Nature as well as Fellow Beings." And it was quite a cryptic article, but it was about the drainage of an 18,000-acre wetland in my home county that had been done kind of schemingly. And it turned out the author of the article was my great-grandfather. And so it set me off on this pursuit. I wanted to know kind of the whodunit. How did 18,000 acres of wetland get drained, especially over the opposition of local people? And then I also wanted to try to imagine what was an 18,000-acre wetland like, and how did people live with that? So it was kind of a, well, threefold. There were also lots of questions about family and my family legacy and my feeling of obligation to tell this story as kind of a family story as well.
When your great-grandfather actually, how did you discover this? I mean, was it by accident?
It was by accident. I was looking, it was a Farmer Labor Party newspaper, a local in southern Minnesota in the 1930s, and I was looking for labor history. And there was this intriguing headline, and there he was.
Now, did you know he was a writer?
I did know that, and that always intrigued me because there were no other writers in my family. We were not even big book readers, so I always was interested in him.
Okay. Well, how long did it take you to complete this book?
I would say it was 9 years, if I can date it correctly. And that was a lot of research and then writing pieces as I discovered things alongside the research.
Yeah, with that said, in the book, of course, how is the rural community sort of impacted after the draining of
well,
wetlands?
To me, it seemed like this was a real critical turning point, that it was the transition from the subsistence-based family farm to agribusiness, that this was the first time that outsiders came in and created industrial agriculture in the area, and prior to this it had been mostly kind of yeoman farmers who had immigrated in either from upstate New York or from Scandinavia primarily. So it really, it had a dramatic impact on how people lived. And my dad, for example, who would have inherited a farm had they not lost it in the ensuing farm recession, ended up working in a meatpacking plant. It became an industrial community with food processing at the center.
Well, with that said, can you tell us a little more about the old Register farm? Because we see it pictured in the book.
Yeah, it was a land claim that was made in 1855 by my great-great-grandparents, who came out originally from New York, but kind of like the way people came west was bit by bit. And they were the first European settlers in that particular township. And they started with 73 acres, and then over the years, more were acquired. So by the 1900s, 1910s, it was a really thriving farm with my great-grandparents running it primarily. And it was diversified farming. I mean, they had dairy cattle, beef cattle, various crops. It was not the monoculture we know, or the duo culture. Now, that whole county is corn and soybeans now, but it was more diversified.
Okay. Well, is the topic that's covered in the book something that's going on right now in the country, and do you see it as dangerous in terms of trends?
Well, I think what we're seeing, I'd like to be a little more optimistic about, is that people are discovering the value of wetlands, and it became very clear to me. It kind of helped me debunk a myth that everybody in the past saw wetlands as wasteland, as swamps full of pestilence. The people who actually lived along the big marsh used it. I mean, they hunted and fished and trapped there. There's really abundant wildlife. They cut wood there. They cut hay when the grass dried in the fall, and fed their cattle with prairie grasses that grew around the edge of the wetland. And so it was a place of life, not this place of death that we picture a swamp. And I think people are now realizing, I mean, I know they are realizing, and here in Fargo, too, the value of wetlands for flood control, for retention of water, for maintenance of water quality, for wildlife habitat, even for weather control. And formerly, way back when the native people were here before that European migration, they were a valuable food source. I mean, even more than they were to the farmers who settled alongside. So I think we are, I mean, it's always a controversy because the drained wetlands have become extremely valuable agricultural land. And so we have to kind of persuade ourselves what's important here, to what extent does the wetland also help sustain that agriculture. It's a balance.
Well, I think you just said it, because generations ago I thought, was it an ignorance to what draining wetlands how it would really impact the region versus getting valuable tillable soil probably. And that maybe that was part of the issue.
Well, in this particular story, I think it was partly ignorance. People didn't realize with some people, like the postmaster in Twin Lakes, Minnesota, who wrote poems about it, recognized the impact that it would have. But I think greed was also a motivator, because the people who came and did it and pushed it through were land speculators who were wanting to make money off the land. They weren't interested so much in living there and being active farmers.
Well, can you tell us about some of the villains, if you will, in the book? Are those some of the villains?
There were two major ones. There was P.D. McMillan, was a real estate developer in Minneapolis who helped build much of the city, but he also looked for this rural area where he could try experimental farming on a very large scale, which would not be done by him, but by people he hired to do the farming. And then the other one was a banker, Bryant Barber, from Polo, Illinois. And I still don't know how he got involved, this distant from his location. But for him, it was a financial investment. It never came to be for him. His bank went bust. So it was kind of left to just, you know, kind of left as half-drained wetland for his part. And then eventually it was taken over by a realtor from Nebraska, from Payne Investment Company, who completed the drainage and then established it as a Dutch colony. They imported only members of the Dutch Reformed Church to buy little plots of land to do vegetable farming. And that thrived for about 30 years and it's still there, but very, very changed.
Is all of this kind of like eminent domain in a way, like it's similar to other situations?
Well, I would compare it, I think, to sports stadiums, like the Vikings Stadium in Minneapolis, where somebody wealthy comes in, has a project that they think they can persuade other people will be of great benefit, and then they want to proceed with the project at public expense. And that was a big issue in this story, that they wanted the local taxpayers to pay for the drainage. And that was a major reason for opposition.
Well, do you think that any relation can be made between sort of your book and this issue and the oil situation in western North Dakota?
I think so. I mean, there is a conflict in this book between outside entrepreneurs who have one set of values and then the local people who have a different set of values, who are a little more willing to live with what the land and the landscape offer them, are not necessarily trying to get rich, but just want a good life and a life that will sustain their families over time, and that maybe their children and grandchildren will continue to live, which is not always the case. So I think that basic conflict of values that we see throughout American life really come to play in both those instances.
How's the reaction been to the book so far?
I hear a lot from lovers of wetlands. Even though it's not, you know, I'm not a wetland scientist. I couldn't tell you all that much about, for instance, how you restore a wetland. But people who do that, or people who are interested in doing that, seem to have latched onto the book. People who just think about their own attachments to landscape. Those are readers I hoped would respond, whether their landscape was, you know, seashore or prairie or desert or whatever. I just want people to kind of think about what that means in their lives. And that's happening a little bit, but it's still pretty new. It just came out in May, so I'm still waiting to see, you know, what happens beyond this.
Okay. Well, can you read us a passage or two from your book?
Sure. I'll read a little opening section that kind of tells what it's like, what it's about, and how it proceeds. Water first. There was a time, an eon of time, when water pooled and ribboned freely among the oak savanna and hardwood copses and in the prairie potholes of southern Minnesota. Crops grow there now on dry land that might yet hold water in its low spots after a heavy, heavy rain. The absence of the old wetlands is to some a tale of triumph, agriculture's conquest over waste and wild to feed a hungry humanity. To others, it is a doomsday story of irreversible damage to the natural environment. We Minnesotans like to think of our state as natural, and it is often colored lovely deep green on the U.S. map. Yet the original landscape has been radically altered in less than 2 centuries of European settlement, not least by the miles of drainage ditches that crisscross the farmland and the even lengthier grid of hollow clay and concrete tiles and plastic piping buried beneath its soil. Many people don't know this subterranean network of field drains exists until, for example, a flood brings to light the risks of draining a heavy spring thaw or torrential rains into an already overburdened river. Alarms are sounding about the polluting effect of farm runoff, soil fertilizers, and pesticides on lakes and rivers. The story that follows recounts one obscure but vital piece of Minnesota's agricultural history, the drainage of an 18,000-acre wetland between Albert Lea and Austin. For generations, Dakota, Sac and Fox, and Ho-Chunk people, as well as family farmers of Anglo-European heritage, lived with this big marsh, gathering wild rice, hunting, fishing, trapping, and haying, until non-resident investors appeared on the scene in 1890, determined to turn it into a showcase of industrial-scale agriculture. For not yet a century, the drained bed and environs of Rice Lake, the deepest portion of the Big Marsh, have gone by the name of Hollandale. The upbeat public story of how Hollandale came to be verges on myth and miracle, and it ignores the first 3 decades of the drainage effort. This new account of the Big Marsh's fate is a more complicated story of hope and loss, of conflicting values, of political intrigue, of family and home.
Well, and so that's in the introduction. Sherry, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you real quick, because I do want to touch on, you've written other books. Can you tell us about those? You've written how many?
Well, about 7, depending on whether I wrote or co-authored or edited. Or, you know.
Okay. Okay. And with that said, I know you mentioned the Packing House Daughter. Tell us about that real quick.
That's about, the main story is a meatpacking strike in Albert Lea when I was a teenager. And it was kind of my coming of age and coming to public awareness because my dad was among the strikers. And it was a very divisive strike in the community. But it's mostly about working class life in rural America.
And you also had a book about chronic illness, and it sounded interesting. Can you tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, my motive for writing that is that I have a lifelong liver disease myself, and so I interviewed 25 other people who have what I call invisible and interminable illnesses. To talk not about the medical aspects, but more about how it affects us, all the aspects of our lives. And that book, that came out actually in 1987, and I had a really, really good response to that. I still hear from people who read that book.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that we're running out of time, and of course you were here talking about the Big Marsh. Thank you for that reading. But if people want a copy of the Big Marsh, where can they go? Who can they contact?
In Fargo, they can get it at Zanbro's Variety Store. And otherwise, I would suggest, well, going anywhere online that you might buy books, but particularly the publisher, Minnesota Historical Society Press.
All right. Sherry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Stay tuned for more. From the days of early settlement in Clay County in 1871, the struggle between the Dries, those who sought to ban alcohol, and the Wets, those who were in favor, was not fully resolved, even with the repeal of Prohibition. A 2-year exhibit at the Umkomp Center in Moorhead looks at the role alcohol has played in the history of the region.
Alcohol has been a challenge for Clay County residents, as it is for everybody, really. Brought in a lot of money in the 1890s and the early 20th century, but it caused huge problems as well.
Settlement here in Clay County started mostly with the Northern Pacific Railroad coming here in 1871. And Every year, wherever the construction stopped for the year, a tent town full of laborers popped up, and around the laborers came tent saloon gunmen, prostitutes, gamblers. You know, the Wild West happened in Minnesota too. With the spring, the laborers kept on building the track west. What was left behind was a better place. Farmers came and busted sod, and every time there was a new village, the people decided whether or not alcohol would be a part of it. Every town in Clay County is dry except for Moorhead and Barnesville. Barnesville may be for more cultural reasons, being a center of German Catholic settlement. Moorhead for business reasons.
In 1890, all the saloons in North Dakota closed, but they could stay open in Minnesota. So Moorhead, like many border communities, became a booze boom town, a place where thirsty North Dakotans come to drink. By 1900, there were 45 bars operating in Moorhead. The population was about 3,700 at that time. So that's like one saloon for every 80 people in town. Clearly it wasn't Clay County residents that were supporting these saloons, it was people coming from dry North Dakota. It was illegal to sell liquor in North Dakota, but for many years it was possible to mail or phone in orders from North Dakota to liquor dealers here in Moorhead and have that stuff shipped out by rail and be there the next day. So it's pretty clear that North Dakota, though technically was dry, in many places it was soaking wet.
When North Dakota was dry and Moorhead was, the Las Vegas of getting drunk, and we had these beer palaces, that's not necessarily a nice place to live.
The result was street crime, domestic abuse, political corruption, deep political corruption here in Moorhead. And the city developed an unsavory reputation that took decades to live down.
There's a quote attributed to Solomon Comstock. He said, there were always many Moorhead citizens who were against liquor traffic, but on the other hand, if they took the 47 saloons out of Moorhead, what was left? Why, liquor was the principal business of Moorhead. Moorhead's greatest problem was whether to be pure or prosperous.
Along with the saloons and the growing power of the saloon industry, there was a backlash. There was one particular group, they had a saloon league, one of the most powerful special interest groups to ever come about here in this country. Here in Minnesota, they worked very effectively to get dry politicians elected to the Minnesota State Legislature. 30th of June, 1915, it passed a county bill, and the county went dry.
The Moorhead saloons closed with great fanfare and fireworks and a lot of sad drunks. Just because you make alcohol illegal doesn't mean people are going to stop drinking, it turns out. People still got their alcohol. These saloon men became owners of soda shops or cigar stores, candy stores, and liquor was still on the menu if you knew how to ask for it. The enforcement of prohibition was really differed from city to city, cop to cop. One great bit of evidence about this, in 1927, Moorhead citizens elected a new mayor. He enlisted the Moorhead City Police in the fight against alcohol. When they're told to bust these things, they know exactly where to go. The arrests skyrocketed from 7 alcohol-related arrests in 1926 to 116 in 1927, even more in 1928. The police knew exactly where to go. They just kind of had a live and let live policy. The very day that beer is made legal again, April 7th, 1933, they called it New Beer's Day. A lot of these guys go legit, pretty much.
Prohibition ended really in fits and starts. When Minnesota voted whether or not to ratify the 21st Amendment that repealed Prohibition, the state voted wet. But here in Clay County, county voters still voted dry. Later in 1933, the 21st Amendment actually went into effect. They remained dry. But it was ridiculous. We were surrounded by places who were selling liquor. It was very easy to bring liquor into the community. It became a real farce. There were cards sitting on 3-2 bars saying, ask us about our 15-cent whiskeys. It was a ridiculous situation, and finally the county decided to have a county-wide vote on the liquor issue, and in 1937, finally, hard liquor sales and strong beer sales were allowed here in Clay County as well. And today we have a mixed bag, really a more complicated system of dealing with alcohol, and we're still trying to sort this all out.
I grew up in Moorhead, and I always thought history happened somewhere else. Looking more into the history of Clay County is just the most fascinating topic that I've ever run across.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Post this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.